Previously, we worked on building a tongue and groove wood beam ceiling in our primary bedroom using pine wood from Home Depot. We talked about the stain combination used and how we made our very own faux wood beams. Soon after, we were ready to install the tongue and groove planks and beams. While it was challenging for our first attempt ever, I think it was well worth it for the final reveal. In between install, I worked on lime washing on our textured walls, no less. Did you ever think it was possible? Well, it is, but there's quite a bit of trial and error mistakes I made that you can avoid that might be helpful to know. Hey, and welcome back to the channel. It's Sarah Lee here at House & Co. Today, without further delay, we're going to be talking about lime washing on textured walls. If you've been following along for the primary bedroom refresh makeover, you probably know that I've been talking about this for quite some time and teasing it here and there. A couple months ago, we did start it, but I wasn't able to finish until just a couple weeks ago. There was quite a bit of trial and error, and that's probably why most people don't even know that it's even possible, because without guidance, you really are just trying to figure it out as you go to see what the best way to lime wash on textured walls. So I'm hoping that with today's tips and just seeing the process of what I did will help you skip over those challenges. If you missed the beginning of the project a couple videos ago, here's a recap. I ordered close to a dozen lime wash samples from 2 different companies and tried them out on paintable adhesive wall swatches, and later made a paint sample book for future reference. I mean, the samples were like 10 bucks, wouldn't you do the same? In the mist, I found the perfect color and I ordered it. So we're taking a bit of a break on the wood ceiling. Luna is currently away, and I'm thinking at least something that I can do is start painting the bedroom, which I did pick out the lime wash and I got all the paints, but I ordered the almost the minimum. So I'm hoping that it will cover 400 square feet. If not, I'm gonna have to reorder, but they're pretty fast on shipping. It actually took like between 5 to 7 days after I placed the order, which they were super fast. So hopefully I have enough to be able to finish before he comes back. Before I get started painting on the walls, I wanted to let you guys know that all of our house walls and our bedroom are a knockdown texture. That means that they're not flat, they're not smooth. And a lot of people wonder, can you lime wash with textured walls? And you can. So I've done it before, which the dining bar wall, that huge wall, is lime wash. I feel like the lime wash itself didn't come out exactly how I wanted it, and it's not as visible. I think I got the colors too close together that you can't notice it. And that was my first time lime washing, but I think this time around, I think I know what I'm doing. So I think this film will turn out pretty good. So I'm gonna show you guys how it's gonna look with textured walls. When installing the wood ceiling, we did make a bit of mess of the room, so the walls need a good dusting, and lime washing does get a bit messy, so laying down plastic is needed. Next up, we're going to prep our primer into a tray and roll our primer. You are probably wondering if primer is needed after all, and it really is for best paint adhesion. I left off last night priming, and I only got to 2 walls. I didn't order enough primer. In my head, I think I was thinking I only needed 1 gallon because I needed 1 coat on each wall, but really I needed 2 coats of primer on each wall. So I should have gotten 2 gallons. So I only got halfway, but we're gonna make do with what we have. I do have enough of the actual color lime wash that I ordered that we can apply it onto these 2 walls. I just can't wait anymore, and ordering these, the other primer for these 2 walls is going to take another probably like week, and at least I can see half the room done already and kind of get a better picture of what it's gonna look like, and along with the ceiling, hopefully working on it this week. So we're gonna get started. If you're wondering what I got, I ended up going with the Eastwood. So I got it at 50% darker for the first coat, and then I got the regular for the second coat, so that there's a tone on tone, but also some variety between the color to pop out a little bit more. So we're just gonna give this a nice little open and get started. After opening your paint can, make sure to mix thoroughly. The lime wash likes to thicken over time, and all the good stuff is piling at the bottom. Using a smaller paint can, I transferred some of the paint and started lime washing. The one thing I'm noticing as I'm applying the lime wash is that the lime wash itself is pretty watery right out of the bucket. The last time I tried the lime wash, it was from a different company. It was quite thick and it was hard for me to apply it. But two, they recommended that you could add as much water to lighten the color. But this, I probably would not add any water because, well, one, I don't want it to be any lighter, but two, it doesn't need any because it's so, the consistency is watery. But it's making my life a lot easier to apply this lime wash. So I don't know what's right and what's not right. So I'm gonna continue on and see how this all turns out. But I'm definitely anxious to see what it's gonna look like.
Adding the first layer was a breeze due to the fact that the lime wash was really watery, which made it easy to move around through the heavy texture on my wall versus normal paint, which has a thicker consistency. One of the most helpful tips I've come across, which I use throughout the entire process, is having a water sprayer on hand and dialing the nozzle to the mist function. Keeping your brush and walls wet while lime washing will create soft brush strokes in between. I'll show you what a hard spot looks like when you converge a new area with lime wash into a dried lime wash area. The method I'm using to lime wash is referred to the cloud technique because they look like clouds or burst. You start in one area and take the paint as far as it can go, then you start in another area and overlap those bursts. What I didn't know was how far I should start the burst and how much I should overlap. I've more commonly seen people use the X technique, which is just making brush strokes in the form of an X to cover the walls. I tried it, but it didn't really work out for the textured walls. I couldn't hardly see any movement.
Catching up where we last left off, I added one coat of lime wash to the two walls that I have here because I didn't have enough primer for the other two. Luckily, good news, I did get shipment confirmation that the primer is on the way, so I think it should run maybe this weekend or early next week so we can finish next week. I'm thinking these all four walls, and I think by then too I'll be painting the baseboards and installing the doors, so it's all good news. And so far, the lime wash turned out really good. Just the first coat. I want to show you guys a closer look of what it looks like before I add the second coat. But I am loving this color. I'm so glad that I went with it, and I'm excited to see what it looks like with the final coat. So I wanted to point out this hard spot. This is why you need the water sprayer, because this area had dried, and because I was applying this wet, it kind of did a hard stop so it didn't all blend in nicely. The water sprayer is supposed to get the dry area wet again, so when you apply the wet paint, it should blend in, which this isn't blending in. This is definitely a hard start where you're seeing here. So that's why you need a water sprayer. So I already knew to avoid this, but I accidentally did it because I was too focused on shooting something, and that's how I got that. But on the second coat, we can fix it, but always keep a water sprayer on hand.
Here's a better look of the hard spot I was just mentioning. If I could best explain the color, it definitely is in between a beige and a grayish. It's a soft color with a nude brown tone depending on the time of day, in my opinion. You're probably wondering, well, what went wrong? Ultimately, the first layer and second layer were too similar in shade. There wasn't a contrast large enough in between both. The reason people love lime wash, it's because of its subtleness when it overlaps, but the texture ate that right up because the colors were just too close in tint shade. My second mistake was the order in which I layered my coats. Most I've seen recommend layering the darkest color first. In my case, I used Eastwood at 50% darker as the first coat, and the second coat was a light coat on top at the regular tint. Well, I ended up with a light colored wall with nothing, absolutely nothing to give me. I really wanted the dark color to appear more. My third biggest mistake were the cloud overlaps. I needed to spread out my clouds and not move from left to right or right to left. The best approach was to start in new places and then overlap my clouds by a few inches from the next cloud.
Now that we have the tongue and groove beam sealing done, we can move on to other things. Next up, I have painting the rest of the walls. I had only painted 2 of the 4 walls, And mostly because I only had enough paint for those 2 walls, I underestimated, but I have everything ready now to be able to finish up these 2 walls and give up a couple touch-ups to the 2 walls over here. I also noticed on the 2 walls that I had previously done, when I added the layering of the Limewash, I think I should have done it backwards. I noticed that when I added the lighter version of the Limewash, it came out a lot lighter than I hoped for, where I wanted the darker on top, or at least for the darker to come through, and it didn't. So I'm gonna actually try to reverse it. So I'm hoping to finish up the entire 4 set of walls here in the next few days.
As you know, after some trial and error, I was ready to begin again lime washing after finishing the wood beam ceiling with Luna. To protect the wood and the current lime wash on the other walls, I added some painter's tape to the edges. Same as before, you roll out your primer. You'll need 2 coats on each wall. To get those edges, you need a smaller brush to brush the primer onto the doorways and edges. In between each primer coat, I waited overnight to start again, but between 4 hours to 8, you can add the second coat of primer. Moving on to the next day, here are my best advice tips after all my trial and error, which hopefully helps you skip over them. I'm first going to start off with a regular tint of Eastwood, which is my lighter shade. I started in the middle of my wall, but you can start anywhere. The first layer is always the easiest to apply. Primer has a slickness to it that helps me move my brush easily through the texture with overall coverage. Instead of following a linear path to paint my clouds, I'm trying to be a bit more sporadic where I place my clouds, moving my path up, down, far left, far right, but making sure that each cloud overlaps into another. If I had to calculate how far I overlap to the next cloud burst to the other, I would say about 3 to 6 inches depending how big your clouds are. You don't want to go too far into the next cloud, otherwise you're just going to drench the color to be equally the same amount, versus fading the color from dark to light. Don't forget to have a spray bottle nearby with the wide mist on. You don't want to drench your paint, otherwise it will create water drips, unless you like that. Just remember to keep away about 1 to 3 feet when spraying. And with my sporadic cloud path making, it's more likely for that paint to dry faster before you get back to that area. So the spray bottle is a must to keep everything wet damp for a smooth and soft overlap of our clouds. I'm just going to keep this footage rolling in case you want to see a full wall covered. Skip a few minutes ahead for the second coat.
So today I think is gonna be the final day that I'm adding Limewash, which I am pretty excited because I feel like I've been, like again, a stop and go for the last like 2 months in between here where I started like 2 walls and then I have these other 2 walls I've been trying to finish because I didn't order enough paint. But all of that aside, it's looking pretty good. I think I've had a lot of trial and error, but I think I have it pretty down on getting this Limewash on textured walls.
After waiting for 24 hours, it's time for the second coat. Learning from my errors, I actually did end up ordering more paint from Portola. My second coat of Limewash I ordered at 200% darker tint. Do they have it at any darker? I'm not sure, but the larger the contrast, the better. Maybe if I had to redo it again, maybe I would have ordered at 300%. Just to make it more obvious, but I feel like the 200% worked well. I think I forgot to mention this the last time because I don't have any footage of it, but before you Limewash any coat, make sure you run your brush through the water faucet and squeeze out any excess before starting. You always want to make sure your brush is damp for easier application. I can hear your thoughts through the screen, and no, you don't have to run the brush again in water throughout the process. Because it's sitting in paint, you always want to make sure that it's damp sitting in paint versus letting it dry on the floor or somewhere else. So make sure that it's always with the paint. Remember when I said the first coat is easy to apply? Well, the second, not so much. Running your brush on Limewash onto Limewash feels chalky versus Limewash onto the slick primer. This is also when I was really grateful that Portola sent me Limewash that was already really watery because it had the best application for the textured walls. On the second coat, and also be warned, it can happen on the first coat, the brush skips through the depth of the texture and it goes right over the bumps and grooves. So you get a lot of these gaps that are not filled. So you want to do is dab your brush onto the wall and spread the paint over. Not sure if you can see this well, but this is what happens when those gaps aren't filled when it dries. The light color shows up in between like tiny specks in between the second color coat, and it's not pretty. On a similar note, make sure not to overlap your paint onto another dried wall, otherwise you'll get these hard spots that don't blend with the existing coat. My second coat, I want to say I was a lot better at keeping a sporadic pattern, even though that the same coat was a lot harder to apply. When applying the second coat, make sure to start in a different pattern area than your first coat. For the baseboards and trim, after being very undecided about what to do and what color to paint them, I decided to go with the Limewash at 50% darker tint, one of the original cans I already had that I needed to use up. Here's a look at the finished walls. What do you think of Limewash on textured walls?
I hope all of my lime washing texture wall tips are helpful. If you have any other questions, feel free to drop them down below. Overall, I am really happy with it. I'm actually using it as a background right now. Would it have been easier with smooth finished walls? Of course, it would have been easier, but the money and the commitment to smooth out the walls was just not in the cards. And honestly, you can't even notice that these are textured walls unless you're like really up close or in certain lighting and angles. But even in photo and video, it kind of glances over the texture and it kind of just, it looks smooth enough to fool anyone, I feel like, unless you're really like trying to get those angles where you're seeing those textures in the wall. But hopefully those things and just kind of knowing the trial and error I went through means that any novice can do it, because that was really my, I mean, other than doing Limewash previously, it was like my first time I actually feel like I did it right. So hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit more perspective on it as well. Overall, I wanted to let you guys know, thank you again for being here and your support. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one.